This video was supposed to be a review for a game called Silence, which is a point-and-click adventure game that was released on the 15th of this month. And after playing through the game, or as some people refer to it as, The Whispered World 2, I found myself stumbling around a question I couldn't find myself answering straight. Are point-and-click games actual video games? Or better yet, would the experience be better as a movie instead? I stand betwixt on this debate. On one hand, I am utterly captivated by the story, the characters, and the vibrantly animated visual design. Just look at it, it's pretty damn beautiful. It transcends the visual storybook archetype by adding high-resolution visuals, beautiful effects, fluid foreground and background animations, and a deeply enriched color palette. You can get lost in the visual nature of the presentation. The dialogue, it can grab you, and the story, it can immerse you with its tenderness. The story revolves around Noah and Rini, two siblings forced to seek refuge in an underground shelter as the bombs of a war above them begin dropping down. When Noah's sister gets lost in the world of silence outside of the refuge, Noah is forced to leave the bunker and find his missing sister. On the other hand, however, when you wipe away the pleasantries and the allure of the presentation begins to fade after some time, you may begin to question the density of the gameplay experience. It's a cinematic, narrative experience that substitutes gameplay mechanics in favor of limited interactivity presentation, visual storytelling, and character development. Of course, there will be an endless debate on the nature of the use of such a narrative style in an industry that has its roots deeply embedded into gameplay. But does it really?
If it falls into the false queen's hands, no one will ever find her. Her reign over silence will go unchallenged.
For most gamers in my generation, we associate the birth of video games with the Nintendo 8-bit era. Not because the NES was the inception point of video games, but because the Nintendo mainstreamed video games as an idea and as a hobby. It was the chopping block for modern game development. But we've got to go back further than that to uncover the real beginnings of video games and adventure games. In 1972, the Odyssey was the birthplace for video games, but it was the Atari 2600, as the second generation of video game consoles that most people remember. The Atari, just like point-and-click games, featured a limited gameplay experience. The games and the technology were so rudimentary and so crass that all the games boiled down to the simplest of ideas and interactivity. Blocks for shapes, explosions for sound effects, one button and a joystick. We had to use our imaginations to help lift the limited technology to a place we could call a game. Point-and-click games, when sliced up to their most primitive interactivity, can match up fairly well to the experiences on the Atari. Of course not visually, but in the way we interact with that one button, one joystick motion, and replace our imaginations and how they could be substituted for the beauty of high-resolution graphics, animations, and sound to visually do it for us on modern HD. As far as the storytelling process goes, things are much different today too. The very nature of high-fidelity visual, animation, and sound aids deliver the experience in a way that no other medium can provide, except for cinema and movies. Sitting down in a cinema is not far removed from playing an adventure point-and-click game during gameplay downtime. After all, it's kind of a watching experience where control is no longer given to you. But then you move on to the gameplay and interactive bits, but are they enough to warrant them being games in the first place? Strip down point-and-click games to their basic visual aids. It's a series of scenes of a bigger picture bundled together with dialogue, music, and sound. It's exactly the same as a movie, with one big exception. The art of interactivity is removed. But how much interactivity does it make to warrant a visual experience being more suited as a video game than as a movie? It really boils down to the diversity and replayability in the game experience for me. Point-and-click games have very little replayability, a staple in other adventure games such as platformers or role-playing adventure games. Thus, it lends itself into a realm where, if it's just a one-way ride to the end, why not just sit back and experience it cinematically? Recent developments such as The Walking Dead showed that developers could get over that hurdle by offering various paths and choices that impact the story via dialogue. It's a great innovation, but it does have a few roadblocks. Slicing and dicing up games and branching outcomes has the chance for players to miss out on chunks of the experience. Developers have had a hard time historically building games that hide, restrict, or corner off content for discovery or replayability. We only need to look at the history of World of Warcraft. Many of the early raids in the game, namely Naxxramas, had single-digit participation rates. Under 1 to 2% of the total player base got to experience them. In turn, they recycle the instance into future expansions so everyone can enjoy it, and to capitalize on what developers call wasted work. Obviously, the review for Silence didn't pan out because of a few reasons. First, there just isn't enough to talk about in a game like Silence. As point and clicking is the centralized mechanic, it's kind of unfair to an audience to drone on about a system that could easily be summarized in 1 to 2 sentences. You point and click, things happen, you find things on the screen, and you move on to the next one. And secondly, the bigger reason, the evolution of games has carried over those positives from point and click games into much more compelling experiences. Action games, RPGs, even first-person shooters and survival games can be filled with the same amount of storytelling detail, an equal amount of character progression, and beauty, but also packed with amazing gameplay, difficulty, mechanical challenge, and learning pacing. And of course, the beauty of a movie comes with the benefit of detaching from that responsibility of ownership. Being an observer and having a crafted experience come alive before your eyes as you sit back and pummel a bag of popcorn isn't such a bad thing either. I would have enjoyed Silence just as much as a movie. There comes a time during adventure games where I stop and ask myself, what is the gameplay adding to the experience? As a cinematic narrative, I often answer that with very little. Not to say that the game is bad, Silence is a great visual experience and a great video game, but I'm not sold on the fact that the gameplay significantly enhances my experience with the medium. At times, it does hinder it. Fumbling through screens to pick out the visual clues you need to advance to the next one. Busy work waiting and flipping through menus, waiting on transitions from screen to screen, waiting on transitions from dialogue to gameplay. A lack of a sense of improvement of deep gameplay mechanics. But there are positives too, most certainly in the realm of the attachment you have to the experience by being awarded some limited control. It feels stronger to have made some contribution to something, a character, a point in the plot, a choice in dialogue options. It impacts our attachment to games and characters. And that goes for the progression too. Finding something on the screen, pointing and clicking, it feels like you're given some small ownership in the flow of the story because your mechanical action progressed the screen, the story, or the plot to the next place. It creates that hand-eye-brain connection, and that's a good thing. We just have to ask ourselves, how much interactiveness are we willing to let go to enjoy a video game? Everyone's ranges will be different and their opinion biased and subjective, as it should be. Our preferences of games are independent, bent, and highly personal, which is why this debate will never conclude. The most important thing that we should embrace though is the meaningful iteration that companies are progressing towards to make the most out of a genre that has long since been deemed dead. Thanks for watching guys, subscribe to Downward Thrust now for more of these discussion style videos and all other gaming goodness, and have a kick-ass day.